Well, welcome into GC Live Talking Tuesday. It is January 30th, 2014, and that means we are getting closer to spring football. And for the Gamecocks, they're getting closer to finalizing pretty much. I say finalizing, you know what I mean. Finalizing in the sense that this roster, this coaching staff, the ends are starting to get tightened, right? They're starting to be able to fill some of those holes that they needed to, whether that be coaches leaving, whether that be players leaving over the last couple months, and some within the last couple days. He's Intern Joe. I'm Mike. You appreciate everyone that tuned in today, because today, well, we're talking about the newest special teams coach for South Carolina. That is Dodie. We hinted at that last week. If you tuned in to GC Live Talking Tuesday, that was a name that we brought up and told you to keep an eye on it. And as we saw things play out the way they did, Joey D is coming to town. In addition to that, we'll also take a look at South Carolina's linebacker group. If you saw today on Gamecock Central, we've been doing this series giving you an early breakdown as to what to expect with every positional group as far as scholarship players are concerned. And linebackers is what we hit on today. And spoiler, a lot of experience, something that you could not say about that room a year ago. Certainly not after Mo Kaba went down against North Carolina. In addition to that, if you missed it today, we're going to dig into the report that Tennessee is under NCAA investigation for multiple major NIL violations across several sports. That was reported today by Sports Illustrated's Pat Forty. What does that mean? Big picture. And why you should be caring as far as a South Carolina Gamecock fan is concerned. In addition to that, we answer any questions from you as well as share some comments from the peanut gallery. Having said all that, Joe, let's get into it. Joe D. Camillus. On Friday, it was reported that this was expected, right? Or Saturday morning, that this was expected. Shane Beamer comes out. Beamer talks about it to an extent. Didn't specifically say because it wasn't a done deal. Board of Trustees on Monday, they approved the contract. And Joe D. Camillus is now your new special teams coordinator / associate head coach. Just your initial thoughts on being able to bring a guy with 30 plus years of NFL coaching experience to Columbia.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I think it's huge, right? You look at the guys that South Carolina is recruiting to the staff. It's guys that have, experience coaching in either an offensive coordinator position, a defensive coordinator position, or a head coaching position. Experience is really, really valuable around South Carolina. And, D. Camillus is a guy that, obviously Shane Beamer trusts to do the job with special teams. He mentioned with Pete Lembo that if he couldn't get Pete Lembo, he's going to coach it himself. And obviously Shane does not want to coach it himself going in to Joe D. Camillus, guy with a lot of experience, most recently at Texas, special analyst there in Austin, but also has experience in the NFL, Mike. That's another recurring theme with this coaching staff. You look at guys like Sterling Lucas, Travion Robertson, a lot of guys that have NFL experience on the staff now, but another really, really big addition. And Shane doesn't have to coach special teams, right? He can still be the CEO of the company, really be the head coach. I was talking about this with Kendall a little bit on my show on Sunday, and thank you all who tuned into that. But, when Shane is able to be the head coach and really focus on that, the culture element of the program does not get lost, right? He can focus on what makes South Carolina, what makes his program, his program, and really focus on the little things as a head coach, instead of being wrapped up into coaching special teams. So Joe D. Camillus, really, really big addition. You needed somebody to coach special teams, Mike.
Yeah, so on Saturday, again, at that point, it wasn't a done deal. It was one of those things, and it wasn't like Beamer was playing games with people. And I think some people got confused because we put the video out there, we put the story out there, giving an update as far as where things stood with South Carolina hiring their next special teams coordinator. And I think to some people, they're like, wait a minute, I thought this was a done deal. Yes and no. As we all know, it has to get approved in front of the board. Board of Trustees, of course, they're not working on Saturdays, right? So you have to wait till Monday. That's why it happened as quickly as it did. And if you heard Beamer say, because I asked him this specifically in my follow-up question to him on Saturday, and I'm going to play the answer as to what Shane was saying as far as what he was looking for in a special teams coordinator. Because again, what he did without directly saying DeCamillis' name on Saturday is sharing the thought process, what went into it. You mentioned it, Joe, right? Was there a possibility of Shane taking over special teams? He brought that up. In addition to that, though, he also shared some of the things that he was looking for, because obviously replacing a guy like Pete Lembo, it's nearly impossible, right? I mean, because of what he brings to the table, not just from a coaching standpoint, specifically when we're talking about special teams, but everything else that he brings, because of his extensive history of coaching college football, because of his experience of being a head football coach for 15 years, now going to be on 16 as he heads the Buffalo for his first year with the Bulls. So I mention all that because Shane, again, without being without mentioning DeCamillis' name the other day, he really showed the thought process and how there were so many different angles that South Carolina was approaching this from. We shared that last week on this program. If you've been paying attention to what I've been saying on the Insiders Forum, as well as my colleagues Chris Clark and Wes Mitchell, everything aligned in the sense that USC wasn't just going to look at it as, okay, who can we bring in to be the next Lembo? Is this guy going to be a good fit? Can this guy also be someone that coaches maybe on the defensive side, right? Maybe helps out the linebackers. And Beamer, again, he hit on all of that. So let's take a listen in case you missed it over the weekend. Shane Beamer met with the media during halftime at the South Carolina men's basketball game. Here's what he had to say.
Yeah. What was going through that process?
No, for me, one, from a special team standpoint, somebody that can make us even better than what we've been already. Kind of what goes back to when I first hired Pete, and some people said, well, you're a special teams guy. Why wouldn't you do it yourself? And I said, well, I didn't feel like I could hire the best person in the country. I would have, and I felt like I did with Pete. If the thing continues to trend like it looks like it's going to, I feel like we've had a grand slam hire potentially with what I was looking for, somebody that could make us better. I certainly thought about doing it myself. We had different ways to structure it, whether it be me doing the special teams myself or breaking it up amongst the staff and hiring another defensive coach or hiring an offensive coach or whatever can make us better from a football standpoint, recruiting standpoint, offense, defense. I'm looking at everything. And in the end, I just felt like to this point, I've only interviewed 2 people for this special teams position. So it wasn't like I was going to cast a wide net just to hire a guy. It would have to be somebody that I felt like was a grand slam hire. And if I was able to make that, then I would hire a special teams coach. And if not, I would look at plan B. But I don't think we're going to have to do plan B. And plan B is okay, too. There's nothing wrong with that. I just felt like plan A was a little bit better.
If things continue to head in the direction you hope they do, when can we anticipate? I know it's not in stone, but when could we anticipate an announcement?
I would hope things continue in the right direction early next week.
And as we saw, of course, that's exactly what happened, right? I mean, and again, I give Beamer credit for just being as candid as he could without saying specifically Joe's name, because again, at the time, it's not a done deal. And we've seen that happen throughout college football, whether it be at South Carolina in the past. I mean, it's not just football, right? So I bring these things up because I thought it really laid everything out as far as what Shane was looking at. Having said that, and Carolina Titan, I see your comment, and I'm not trying to pick on you, but I disagree with your comment as far as saying coaches come and go, so I don't really care who's coaching what. If the product on the field is good and consistent, I'm happy. Maybe you're an outlier to that, because I feel like probably a lot of people disagree with that. And the reason why I say that is because at the end of the day, if God forbid special teams is not having the type of results that you're looking for, right? We talk about special teams here with Joe DeCamillis. It could be the running back position. It could be the wide receiver position. It could be defensive back coach, whatever the position could be. If you're not getting things done, naturally, you're going to be looking at, okay, what kind of changes are we going to have to do to be able to make this team better? We saw that with South Carolina this offseason with moving on from Ontario Hardesty and bringing in Marquell Blackwell. So I bring that up because not only that, but at the same time, too, coaching's important at this level. It's very important. Very important. And it's not just from a recruiting standpoint. There's so many layers to it. It's not just the head coach. It's being able, and we heard from one of the newest faces, James Coley, talking about it from a wide receiver standpoint, meshing the room together when you have new players coming in every year, not just from the high school ranks, but from the transfer portal as well, combined with players who may have been here for not just 1 year already in the program, but 2 years, 3 years, guys who may have been here for 4 years, going on to their 5th year with the program. So I share all that because there's so many layers to it now in college football. I'm not saying it wasn't that way before in some regards, but now you need to be able to do a hell of a lot more. So, Joe, I say this to you because I think naturally, whenever you have a hire, regardless of the position, especially when we're talking about the assistants, right? People are always going to look at it and try to nitpick. It feels like from the majority of this fan base, they're very excited about this hire. The only criticism, and I get it, because again, you're always going to try to nitpick some type of hire. I mean, it even happens with head coaches. The only criticism I've seen with this is what can he do from a recruiting standpoint? And I'm not saying it's not a fair question, because again, if you want to try to nitpick, that's where you'd probably look at. We have some guests lined up later this week who'll be able to talk about it much better than I can. I mean, I can share my thoughts as well as some conversations I've had with former Gamecocks, former NFL Gamecock players. One former Gamecock who had a lot of success in the NFL on special teams. I thought he said it best when I talked to him the other night about it. He's like, you know what he does from a recruiting standpoint? Number one, as long as he can relate to kids, and that's a big what if, right? But as long as he can relate to kids. As you mentioned, he was a special assistant at Texas last year. Got his feet wet a little bit more from the college standpoint. You know what his recruiting tool is? Being able to go out and say, hey, you want to go play in the NFL? Look at these 2 rings I have from being a special teams coordinator for the Broncos for Super Bowl 50 and what I was able to do with the Rams just 2 seasons ago as their special teams coordinator. Go ask Darian Stewart, former Gamecock defensive back on that Broncos team. Go ask Ernest Jones, Kyle Markway on those Rams and that Rams team. You want to play at the next level, go look at the Nick Muses of the world. Go look at the Jalen Brooks of the world. Go look at the Nate Atkins of the world. Keep going down the list. The players who have played at South Carolina, where special teams played a big role and a big reason why they're at that next level. So if you want to go play in the NFL, great. I mean, not everyone's going to be Spencer Rattler. Not everyone's playing quarterback. Even if you play receiver, defensive back, a lot of times you're going to have to find a way onto a roster through special teams. This guy knows it better than a lot of people out there. A lot of people. Why? Because he's been doing it for 30 freaking years in the NFL. Arguably one of the best special teams coordinators and special teams minds out there on either level. And now he is a coach at South Carolina. So that's what I would say from a recruiting standpoint. This guy knows what it takes to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, absolutely. You want a guy that has all of that experience in the NFL. And Mike, I mean, I feel like we bring it up every week, and it is the offseason, so we do have to talk about some of the same things. But, South Carolina, what they're doing with their coaching staff and the NFL experience, it goes into areas where NIL can't necessarily, right? When you have coaches like Sterling Lucas, Joe DeCamillis, who have had success at the next level, who have spent more than a decade at the next level, they know what kind of player is at the next level, has success in the NFL. So it's another recruiting advantage, right? Because, you have a guy who has seen so much of what makes a pro athlete and also have success. You mentioned DeCamillis' 2 rings. That's huge. And so it goes in an area where, sure, you might not have all of the NIL money in the world. And I'm not saying South Carolina doesn't, but it is another area that South Carolina can use in recruiting where they can pitch it, be like, hey, these guys know, the next level better than anyone else, come here and we'll turn you into a guy that's going to have success. And, currently, I mean, Mike, you brought up the Gamecocks that are in the NFL. They're all finding their, roles with their respective teams, finding a niche and having success, right? They're staying in the league. They're having longevity. to their career, which I think is also another big pitch. So a lot of good stuff comes into, I guess hiring NFL talent in terms of, recruiting, I think. So, there's a lot of good stuff to like about this Deacon Millis hire. And we'll see, like, obviously, at the end of the day, it is the product on the field. So, we'll see. I'm assuming Deacon Millis is going to be able to pick up, Beamer ball and that whole reputation, just fine. But yeah, we'll see, Mike.
A couple things I want to add too. So he was an assistant special teams coach for the Denver Broncos in 91, 92. That's where he got his coaching career in the NFL going. And then he quickly became a special teams either coach or coordinator throughout his career quickly. Been a coordinator. I'm looking at the resume right now. He's been a coordinator outside of last year, of course, when he was the special assistant to Steve Sarkisian at the University of Texas. But he's been a special teams coordinator all those other years from 2009 through 2022. Cowboys, he was the coordinator there for. Bears, also the assistant head coach there for the Bears. Special teams coordinator for the Broncos, we mentioned Super Bowl 50. Jacksonville Jaguars, and then the Rams. And then, of course, this past season with Texas. In addition to that, he comes from a football family. We share this. We talk about this with Shane Beamer. He's the son-in-law of a Gamecock great, as well as a legendary NFL coach, Dan Reeves. So I bring that up because that's something else that plays a role with this, right? As I shared on the show last week, he was one of the guest speakers at the high school clinic that Shane Beamer does each year. And in addition to that, from talking to people close to the program, he also had an opportunity, I believe it was around that time, to watch film with players, USC special teams players. So I'm not going to be naive to say, okay, they all know each other. I mean, come on, right? But at the same time, too, he's had an opportunity to sit in, watch some film with those guys. Those guys, I'm sure they were introduced to him. Got the whole spiel about his background, resume, and obviously there's some new guys there, right? The early enrollees here, the guys who weren't enrolled into South Carolina at that point last spring. But the point being is Beamer trusts this man enough, not just to hire him, right? I think that goes without saying, but he trusts them enough to be able to bring him back, not only speak at his coaching clinic, but to also watch film with his players. I think that's pretty good. Pretty good. Yep. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to the linebackers, Joe. Okay. I was very blown away by some of the numbers I saw when I did my breakdown. And again, if you guys aren't familiar with this, head on over to Gamecock Central. If you're not a subscriber, sign up for $1 for the first month. Can't beat that. Because in addition to everything that we talk about from a football standpoint, whether it be analysis, whether it be recruiting, whether it be updates on coaches, scoops, all that other stuff in between. In addition to that, you get everything else. Men's basketball, off to one of their hottest starts in about 10 years, right? Go back to that 2015-16 season. Women's basketball, number one team in the land. I mean, you can keep going down the list. Softball got ranked today. Baseball, they're ranked. Everything's on Gamecock Central. Join the community if you're not already a member. But having said all that about the linebackers, Joe, listen to this stat. I thought this really was something. So when you look at USC's linebacker room from a year ago, you go down with one less body, just a couple plays in with Mo Kaba.
Yep.
When we talk about how thin that linebacker room was, how inexperienced, because Stone Bland, he played a bunch of snaps last year, a bunch of snaps. And I know Stone's gone, but we're just talking about last year for a minute. Because of how inexperienced that room was, you didn't have a choice but to play him. Obviously, Debo Williams played out of his mind. Multiple SEC honors. Also on the honorable mention for a couple All-American list. that room was so freaking thin, so young. And when you don't have the play up front, the way that South Carolina didn't for the majority of the season, it felt like, on the defensive line, once it gets to that next level, I don't, again, if you are thin at that position, it's only going to expose that third level. And I felt like we continue to see that. This isn't making excuses for the defensive backs. But when we talk about missed tackles or explosive plays, not just plays through the air, some of that also has to do with the fact of how thin South Carolina was at linebacker. It was making an impact by reaching the third level at times, or because of, again, not having the fresh legs, because of depth, lack of experience at the second level, there were things that were happening a little bit more. And again, some of it also had to do with the lack of pressure up front. So I say that because that's not the case this year. That's not the case this year. Let's share this for the folks that haven't seen it yet. The linebacker room. And again, these are just the scholarship players. Look at where South Carolina is at right now from an experience standpoint. This is what stands out to me the most, Joe. Take a look right in that middle.
Yep. Not much. Not much, Mike.
Well, I'm saying this year, but I'm saying this upcoming year, though, Joe. Look at the experience now, though, because you added Knight, Kamara, right? Willis was coming in from Ole Miss. And again, there's some guys that are no longer here. Pup Howard was no longer with the program, but he was obviously a freshman. Stone Blanton was making his way up into his second year. So I say that, Joe, because as we sit here today, you have 8 scholarship players. 8 scholarship players from the linebacker core. And here's a stat that really stood out to me when I was doing this breakdown. When you look at, we talk about the inexperience from last year. When you look at Williams, Martin Scott, right, Bam, Knight, and Kamara, those 4 players have played, take a guess, how many games they've played combined. Throw a number.
45?
100.
No, 100. I was going to say it's got to be up in the hundreds.
Yeah,
I don't know.
160 combined games between those 4. It's all right, Joe. But hey, the point being is they've played a bunch of games.
They have.
It's all right. I stunk as a kid trying to do the whole jelly bean in a jar thing.
I'm a journalism kid, Mike. We don't really do math. Statistics is really the only thing I gotta go.
You telling? I had to freaking take a freshman math class senior year, but that's not the point. The point being is you have a lot of experience in that room. And when I did my early breakdown on what I am predicting for week 1, we've been giving who we expect to start week 1. If South Carolina is playing that 4-2-5 base defense, okay, I think it goes without saying, all right, Debo Williams is out there. All right, he'll be out there. He's 1. Now it becomes interesting to see who that number 2 is. For me right now, based on how he finished the year and the spark that he gave you from a defensive standpoint, I'm going with Bam. I'm going with Bam right now. I really like what Bam did to close out the year. He had, I think it was 30. He had 38 tackles on the season, but he had 28 over those last 3 games of the year. I really like what Bam did. And while South Carolina's defense wasn't perfect, I mean, they played really strong defense towards the end of the year. Really strong defense. While things weren't always perfect, it felt like when Bam was out there, they were able to get some added speed, gave you that pressure coming off the edge, was athletic enough if you needed to drop him back into coverage. Not saying that's what I want to see every single play, but I really like some of the things he did. Having said that, when you bring the experience of Knight and Kamara, and never mind Mokaba, who I really, at this point, I don't want to make any assumptions about where Cobb is going to be at game 1, simply because let's wait and see how he looks just moving around when we get that opportunity to see him at some point. So I'm putting Cobb right now on the back of the stove, and that's okay. That's okay. Because even if Cobb is not able to give you even just 50% of what he's been able to give you in the past, when you look at those 4 guys right there, you have to love where you stand right now. And if you want to go and be, crazy, you want to, 3-3-5 defense, again, Debo, Bam, and then have your choice between Knight and Kamara. I mean, there's more depth right now with just those 4 guys than there was a year ago.
Yeah, no kidding, Mike, right? I think, Williams and Martin Scott are your 2 starters. I don't know, Mike. I think, Cabo, he certainly can compete for a starting job. It really all depends on how he looks at camp, right? How he looks in spring ball, how he looks in summer. But I mean, I think it's a possibility that you see Mo in that rotation more than a Demetrius Knight and a Kamara, but we'll see, right? I mean, Mo has to come in, put in a solid camp, stay healthy. I'm knocking on wood for you there. But I mean, so yeah, Mo has to really, really, really put it together this offseason to, find his way into that rotation. Whatever formation it may be, whether you're in the 3-3-5, whether you're in the 4-2-5. I think in the 4-2-5, you stick with Martin Scott and Debo, simply because Debo is really, really good at covering the outside. He's more of a tendency towards an outside backer. But when he's in the middle of the field, he can do really it all. He's a really, really complete linebacker too. So whether you're in the 3-3-5 or the 4-2-5, I think you should feel confident with Williams in there regardless. And I mean, obviously he's the main guy that's going to start, the only guy that really has it locked up, I would say. But whoever you pair with Williams should give you hope. And then also, Mike, I mean, I know we're talking about linebacker right now, but you mentioned at the top of the point, other positions, what South Carolina has been able to do, getting other positions on the defense will help this linebacker unit out a lot, right? Specifically at defensive tackle and at edge. You look at the 2 red names up there above it, defensive end, Kyle Kennard and Gilbert Edmond coming back, along with Dylan Stewart. You have more depth at edge, right? You can get more of a pass rush. So that way the linebackers don't have to do it, right? Because if you can't get a pass rush with your defensive line, you have to blitz a linebacker to try to get some kind of pressure. So, when you have more help on the defensive from, the edge, and then obviously at the defensive tackle room, we've talked about this a bunch too, but, Tonk on Boogie asking for more help, them getting it at the defensive tackle room. I think it's huge, right? Just more of a rotation helps you get more of a pass rush. Guys aren't getting as tired. And then you're also giving, opposing offensive lines different looks with different guys. So obviously I think a linebacker, again, knock on wood, you hope that they don't go through something like they did last year, but they are, really restocked. Wendell Gregory, Fred Johnson, two other guys that, they get in, have a good camp, could also, make a name for themselves. I don't, are they going to be in the starting rotation? Probably not, but we will definitely see them on the field. We saw how much Pup Howard kind of had to play as a freshman. And, both of these guys have very high ceilings, right? Good frame, traditional SEC style linebackers, Mike. So, that should excite you as well. And those kids, I mean, once they get through the weight program, they're going to look like a different person.
That's why in a perfect world, you don't have to use Wendell Gregory or Fred Johnson more than 4 games, right? You keep them under that 4-game mark, 4 or less, so that they're able to maintain that eligibility.
You go right up until that 4-game point.
Correct. And then, we've seen in the past 2 years ago being able to play a 5th game in the bowl game. I share that because some people go back and they'll look at 2 seasons ago. Luke Dodie, for example, he played 5 games. And some people will be like, wait a minute, how does he still have 2 years of – oh, that's right. The NCAA let them play 5 games that year, that extra one in the bowl game. But going back to this, the whole point is – they have more depth. They have more talent. Now, and we've mentioned this before.
Travis.
We've mentioned this before. What South Carolina has done, it's not just limited to South Carolina. When you bring guys in from the portal, and even though USC has a really, really, really talented portal class on paper, not everyone's going to pan out the way that you would like them to. I mean, that's just being realistic, right? That's not just, not being a Debbie Downer. That's just the reality of it. I mean, if you hit on everyone, I mean, good luck to you, right? But I say that because when you look at their linebacker core right now, because of how it's built from the top, starting with Debo And then, of course, with Bam, with what he was able to do towards the end of last season and obviously playing more and more as the season went on, played 10 games. I think the only 2 games that he didn't appear in was the Georgia game, and he didn't appear in the first game of the season against North Carolina. 10 tackles for a loss. And then, he was doing a lot of good things. Had a pair of sacks too. 10 tackles in 2 of the final 3 games. And then he had 4 tackles for a loss on the year and a pair of sacks. But the whole point being is, if those 2 guys are playing at such a high level, and this is assuming South Carolina will play a 4-2-5 defense. We saw them change things up a little bit last year, but I felt like the reason why they did that more than anything is because of the challenges they were having up front, and they were able to get a little creative. I know some people are asking, from an edge standpoint, and really what it comes down to is, and Travis asked, I believe we do have enough versatility that we have the body types for each defense. Yeah, they could be versatile. And that's fine. I still think at the end of the day, what they'll want to do in a perfect world will be a 4-2-5, simply because it allows you to match up a little bit better. Having said that, the depth that they have, and we talked about this before with the edge position, with the defensive tackle position in particular, they have the bodies now. They have talented. They have experience at the defensive tackle position. They have the bodies now to be able to do things up front defensively that they weren't able to do a year ago. And we talked about this, the number of snaps that guys like Debo Williams had to play, like Stone Blanton had to play. But when you move up to the defensive tackle position, there were a lot of plays that those D tackles had to play. I mean, some of the plays Boogie had to play. I mean, my goodness. So I say that because having those fresher legs, it's going to allow them, especially if they're able to have the production, right? I mean, it comes down from a production standpoint. You can have all the talent in the world on paper, right? You can have all the experience in the world. We talk about that number 160 for those 4 linebackers combined right there on the far left of your screen in that linebacker room. That's great. But are you going to be able to produce? And are they going to be able to produce from an 11-man standpoint, right? Do your job. Do your 111th. If they're able to do that, Travis, yeah, I think they're going to be able to do whatever the hell they want. But again, I still feel like what they'll try to do is they'll try to be a 4-2-5 defense, just because they have had success with it. Last year, yeah, didn't work out. But as I've mentioned before, I also think there were other layers to the issue, not just from a defensive back standpoint. You're not putting pressure on the quarterback. And a lot of that had to do with their front 7. And when you really start to peel things back, like I said, not having the depth, not having the experience, and when you don't have those 2 things, and you're not being able to put pressure on the quarterback, a lot of that had to do with the fact that they just didn't have the legs. They didn't have the legs. They have that this year. They have a lot more depth, a lot more talent. But again, we'll see if they're able to actually make the most out of it. Sounds great right now, but hey, it's talking season.
Yep. Big Red, they do have a running backs coach. That would be Marquell Blackwell stepping in as running backs coach. Good hire. Another guy with play calling experience, head coaching experience as well. Mike, I mean, I don't know if you wanted to talk about him at all.
We had an opportunity, and I'm trying to think now. It's probably been about a week and a half ago since Blackwell was officially introduced at his press conference, right? And the things that I just really like about the guy is that he's all football. He's all business. And we've mentioned this before in the past, even before they made the hire. Just bring someone in that room that's not going to screw it up. Because right now, when you look at it, and it's not just, okay, what South Carolina's running back room going to look like next year? When you go down the list, and I get it, some people don't want to look at it this way anymore because college football is different. You can't make assumptions that guys will always be there year after year after year. I understand that. However, for the sake of the conversation, when you look at what South Carolina has, not just next year, but the guys that are eligible to come back the following year, 2 years from now, they're really building a strong running back room. They have a great running back room, again, on paper, heading into this year. A lot of the things that we talked about from a linebacker standpoint, they have a lot of experience. They have a lot of depth. They have a lot of talent in that room. But I think with Blackwell, with his attitude and just the way that he, again, all business in his background of being a quarterback, I think he's going to be able to get the most out of the running backs in a way that will help, especially in this upcoming year, that will help a guy like Lenora Sellers or whoever the hell the quarterback is week one. Because you're going to have either a young quarterback in there or you're going to have a guy that that really didn't play at all last year as a Gamecock. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
Yep.
Whether it be Reno, whether it be Sellers, whether it be Ashford, whether it be Bevel, the walk-on, regardless, you're going to have someone in there that's new to the system in a way that he's going to have to do a little bit more. And I say new to the system because for Sellers, the stuff that he was doing in games, a lot of the time it was garbage time, right? He wasn't doing the things that he would be asked to do this year. So that's why I say that. Having a running backs coach who has played the quarterback position in a way is like being able to see, the things that we've seen with Luke Dodie at wide receiver. He's able to provide a perspective at that position that's very unique. Blackwell, of course, he's not a player, but he's going to be able to provide a unique perspective by being someone that has experience of playing quarterback that can help the running backs out understand more what they need to be able to do to help Sellers, to help that young quarterback out. And I think in the situation that USC is currently in, you could not have asked for a better coach than Blackwell right now, in my opinion. Just because, again, he's going to, based on the things he was saying, he wants to educate his running backs on not just doing what they have to do, but understanding why are they doing this? Why is a quarterback doing this? Why are they blocking a certain way? Why is a wide receiver doing this? Why is a tight end coming up and doing this block? Can help your running backs out. I mean, we talk about being a student of the game. That's it to a T. That's it to a T.
Yep.
I do want to go back real quick. I know we talked about this. Monberry brought this up. We mentioned this the other day because we've been doing this now for the last couple of weeks. But I'll just show it. I'll show it because it also goes into one of the other questions that someone asked about Rocket Sanders with his injury. But you look at the offensive line. There's been some changes over the last, 2 weeks. Trey Jones no longer on this projected roster. Tyson Wanamaker, as we reported about a week and a half ago, that he's walking away from football as well. So you lose two guys that have a lot of experience, but again, and we've talked about this before, you have a lot of depth, a lot of talent because of the circumstances from a year ago with guys like Aluatos and Babalade, with guys like Trevon Baugh. They were thrown right into the mix. And in addition to that, you have guys like Henry, who were starters week one before he got hurt. You have a guy like Anderson, Marquis Anderson, who redshirted, medical redshirt from his freshman year, who was on the travel list. I mean, shoot, I remember getting the travel list up in Charlotte. He was still on the travel list for crying out loud, despite the fact that he didn't travel, because that's how much they expected him to be there. So I say that because there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of talent. Never mind Pringle and Thompson coming in. They have a lot of talent right now. So that's what I would say. A lot of depth. And I think this is something that you're starting to see with South Carolina, especially with the trenches, right? We talked about building the trenches, offensive line, defensive line. They're not just saying it. I mean, it's cute to throw it on the marquee and stuff, hashtag trenches. No, they're getting friggin' things done on both sides of the ball. And I think those two positions in particular, those two areas, and I say positions, I'm grouping defensive tackle with the edge room right now, just calling it defensive line as a whole. You can see the progress. Again, everything's on paper right now. It's the off season, docking season, but you're seeing that progress made right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the offensive line right now, it's so young, but A lot of guys with experience, and then you're bringing in a lot of talented freshmen as well. So it's going to be young and inexperienced room, but again, they're going to be going against some experienced talent in the defensive line. So the line of scrimmage at practice is going to be a really fun battle. So we'll see how this all pans out for South Carolina. I mean, again, offensive line, you're inexperienced, but this is where Lonnie Teasley and Greg Adkins get to go to work, right? These are the guys that they've been recruiting for years, right? The big offensive line class was the class of 2024. So, now they get to go to work. So, we'll see. Again, you do have some experience in that room, and that's helpful. But yeah, these guys just need to get adjusted to college ball, and we'll see where they're at when we come out of summer football.
One last thing I want to make note of.
Hit some ads and then Tennessee.
Of course, I'm trying to pop something up here so that I can talk to everyone about it. Here we go. Where's the question? Big Red asking about wide receiver 1. I don't see Harbor as the number 1 receiver. Week 1, I really don't. I still think there's plenty of area where he can improve. And I don't think he needs that pressure right now, to be honest with you. I don't feel like he's there yet. I know some people get all bent out of shape when you just call it for what it is. I don't think he's there yet. And that's okay. That's all right. Again, yes, he was a 5-star coming out of high school, but he's a guy that was playing defensive end and tight end. He wasn't a wide receiver. He's still learning the position. I thought he did some good things last year. My prediction, and I wrote this on Gamecock Central. You can head on over. You can check this out if you want. Just my gut feeling on a lot of these positions and who I expect to see. As we've seen in the past with South Carolina, Beamer's mentioned it. They want to have an idea who their top 6 wide receivers are going to be. That's what they're looking for heading into each week. And there's going to be a lot of intriguing matchups as far as competition goes at multiple positions. Offensive line is one of them, right? Defensive line at certain positions, whether it be D tackle, whether it be the edge position. But when you look at the 6, when you look at who those 6 could be in that wide receiver room, I'd argue that it could be the most appealing. It could be the most intriguing of all the competitions.
Yeah.
Having said all that, I really think a guy that South Carolina has been able to pick up via the transfer portal, like Jared Brown from Coastal Carolina, can be your number 1 guy. When you look at the heights for a lot of these guys, right? Brown 6 feet tall. Harbor, of course, he's taller than that. 6'4", 6'5", whatever Harbor is. But I say that because after Brown, he just keeps going down 5'11", 5'10". I wouldn't get so caught up on the height on a lot of these guys. I really wouldn't. You have what you have. And James Cole even said it the other day, the new wide receivers coach. So, you don't want to listen to me. That's fine. That's what he was talking about the other day. There's a lot of wide receivers. You look at the NFL, you look in college football across the country, you don't have to be 6'2", 6'4". It's great if you have some size. It's great, right? Xavier Luedecke, he was a beast. But you also, there's no blueprint is what I'm trying to get at. And the reality is this is where South Carolina is with their wide receivers. That's not to say that there won't be any hiccups, that there won't be any problems, that you shouldn't be concerned to an extent. I'd be a little concerned simply because there's a lot of talent in that room, but they haven't done it at South Carolina yet. And for a lot of these players, that's no fault of their own, right? Jared Brown had a lot of success at Coastal Carolina. Even though I'm sitting here saying that that's a guy that I can see being the number 1 wide receiver for USC, that doesn't mean things are going to be smooth for him right away. Thank you, Travis. Travis says Luedecke is 6'1". So I bring this up because I wouldn't get so caught up on the height. But having said that, and Joe, I don't know if you want to piggyback off some of this. These were the 6 that I gave for my early prediction. And again, we're sitting here in January, one of the last days of January. second to last day in January. Things are going to change once we get out there from a spring standpoint, and certainly when we get into fall camp. But just based on where things are right now, in my opinion, I could see Brown being that number 1, Huggins Bruce being that number 2, Harbor being 3. And when I say 3, I wouldn't get so caught up on, okay, does that mean Huggins Bruce, I think he'll be your slot guy. He has the ability to go outside if he needs to. I mean, obviously with Harbor, you'd love to see him outside. So, again, Brown, Huggins, Bruce, Harbor. I really like Russell. Despite the fact that South Carolina has added multiple players from the transfer portal into that room, I still feel like Russell's going to take that next step. He did a lot of good things as a freshman last year. Laberdane, and then I also have Dodie for right now. And I know some people are going to roll their eyes when I say Dodie, but here's the thing. Here's the reality. This is what we do know. The staff likes Dodie. If you go back and listen to both what Dal Loggins and Spencer Rattler had to say about him last year at wide receiver, it wouldn't surprise, and it shouldn't surprise any of you if you see Dodie in that top 6 to start the year. Again, this is week 1. With how young that wide receiver room is, combined with the fact that you'll likely be having a young quarterback starting, Dodie can be a much-needed security blanket because he arguably understands the offense better than anyone out there because of his background as a quarterback. And we saw that at times this past season with Rattler and the connection that they were able to have with Dodie and the praise that Rattler gave Dodie. So I say that because I think guys like Caldwell, Bennett, Gatling, we can keep going down the list, Henderson, Adams, those are guys I can see competing for that 6th spot, especially as time goes on throughout the season. But I would not be shocked to see Dodie in that top 6 to start the year, simply because of the reasons why I just listed. Now, I don't know what you think, Joe. Again, I gave my 6. I don't know if you have any thoughts on anything in particular I said. It could be Dodie.
I mean, I think the wide receiver room obviously is very, very talented. I think, Nick Harbor finds himself at the 2 slot at the start of the year. If Nick Harbor was ready for the number 1 wide receiver position, they wouldn't have brought in as many veteran guys. You would have seen them bring in, guys that are transferring for their first time, like true freshmen, sophomores, guys that have a high ceiling. If Nick Harbor was ready to lead that room, I think they would have gone on the younger side in the portal to kind of backfill with depth. You knew they were going to get some experience, but they went heavy with the experience in the portal. So I think this year, the goal is to have Harbor be ready to take the number 1 position, but he's still really, 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 really young. Mike, I'm trying to pull up the roster in front of me, so I can't give you the 6 I have off the top of my head. All right. So, yeah, I mean, personally, I think, Larva Dane's a name to watch.
And this is and real quick, Joe, these are guys that are scholarship players.
Yes.
These are the ones come up. That's not to say a walk-on who's on the team can't earn an opportunity. I mean, it happens throughout college football, but just to give people a reminder who may have missed some of this, because some people will be like, wait a minute, I don't see so-and-so's name. This is just scholarship players right now that you're seeing on your screen.
And I'll say this too, like realistically, what I think out of the wide receiver room in terms of production, names that you need to know are you got to watch Nick Harbor, Jared Brown, Larva Dane, Gage Larva Dane, and then Huggins Bruce. I think those are really the 4 guys that you're going to see producing. There's also depth there as well. Mazio Bennett could see the field. It's wide receiver. Nick Harbor saw the field his freshman year. I mean, Bennett, you look at his size, maybe it takes him a little bit longer to adjust to the SEC, but also maybe not, right? We know what kind of competitor Mazio is as well, right? That was part of the whole pitch. The whole reason why Shane Beamer and Justin Stepp wanted him so bad was that he can compete. So I think, there's going to be Kelvin Henderson as well. Elijah Caldwell is going to be a big name too, but all these guys are going to go compete. I think that's the biggest thing. But in terms of production, 4 names to watch, it's Harbor, Jared Brown, Huggins, Bruce, Larva Dane, but then also keep an eye on Caldwell, Henderson, Bennett, Tyshawn Russell as well. We saw a lot of good things out of him last year, and the building seems to be excited about him as well. But yeah, I think you'll really be looking at 4 or 5 guys that are going to see production out of this wide receiver room. Mike,
what's your thoughts on Dodie? And I don't want you to, I don't want you to sugarcoat it. I don't want you just to have to go out there and feel like you're, you have to put like your Luke Dodie t-shirt on with a big heart around it. But be honest, like, where do you see him factoring in, at least heading into week 1? And you don't have to agree with some of the things I said, because I'm sure some people listening, based on some of the stuff I said, maybe they don't agree. I mean, what was just your overall thoughts with how you expect USC to use him, at least heading into that first game of the year?
DK Joyner role immediately. Like that's just kind of all around offensive weapon. I think he'll work with the receivers because that's kind of the body size that you want him. You want him to be lighter and nimble, kind of play the Taysom Hill role a little bit. Just all around offensive threat. He's going to rotate, but I think he sticks with receivers. Again, I know there were some doubts in the program and just everyone about him playing quarterback. I think since you restocked a quarterback, I don't think, Luke Dodie playing quarterback is of your biggest concern right now. I think, you're trying to mold him into the athlete that he can be, right? To be able to run the football. You can also throw it too. I think, he's still going to be throwing the football, but he's not going to be working with the quarterbacks primarily. He needs to be ready to go run routes, potentially in the backfield. He can also block a little bit too. So I think he's more valuable to your team, just as an all-around offensive weapon. I don't think he's good enough to play quarterback in the SEC, and that's just me. But and now that's full-time as yes, can we see him come in here and make a couple plays at the quarterback position, kind of DK Joyner role, make have potential to wildcat or something, just a different look at quarterback. Yeah, I mean there's a big chance that he can have success with that. But as a full-time quarterback, I don't see why you would, just kind of waste his years of eligibility, as a quarterback when that, he's not prepared or hasn't been prepared to play quarterback at that level. So, right, you use what you have, and Dodie is one of those all-around offensive weapons that you can use in one of those roles, those DK Joyner roles, kind of place him and put him anywhere. Dowell's had fun with formations like that. So we'll see. But I just, wide receiver, running back, tight end, maybe a little bit, even some just kind of wonky formations with him. I'm sure we will see him in kind of a wildcat formation as well. But just I don't think, he'll be working as a primary at quarterback, just to maximize the talent that Luke Dodie has.
So you mentioned the DeCarrion Joyner role.
Yeah.
And I think naturally there will be a portion of the fan base when they hear that, and they'll think that is some type of they'll associate with that with something like, from a negative connotation standpoint.
No, not at
when
all.
I hear that, to me, and this goes back to one of the reasons why I have him in that top 6 right now, especially for week 1. What it shows me is trust. It shows me trust, right? So I think right now I wouldn't be shocked to see, again, Dodie in that top 6, and Travis says Dodie should be in the quarterback room as the mentor to Sellers and QB2. I still wouldn't be shocked if he were to end up being the backup. And the reason I say that is no disrespect to the guys in that room. I don't want to, say, okay, this guy's going to be here. But the point being is how comfortable and how much trust do those players in that quarterback room earn from this coaching staff? So the reason I say that is because, you pray to God that whoever the quarterback is next year, that you don't have to go to QB2. But point being is I wouldn't just shut that door on it completely, because like last year, I mean, he was working with the wide receivers a lot. And as we've heard from Beamer, they anticipate him doing even more of that this year. But I also wouldn't shut the door completely on possibly seeing Dodie there. But again, I
got one more thing on it, Mike, I guess, if you will. It also kind of depends. You also see, what kind of leaders you have on this team early on in spring ball, right? If you need him to be a constant force and a leader in the quarterback room, he's going to play quarterback. I mean, right? Like part of the DK role that I'm including this in is, also the leadership ability. Dodie wouldn't be on the roster if they didn't think, he was valuable from a team culture standpoint or from a leadership standpoint. So I don't know, Mike, I think it's too early to tell at this point, but I would agree. I think, don't put it out of the quarterback possibility yet, but in my personal opinion, I'm leaning a little bit more towards wide receiver.
So Burley asks, what has Dodie done but show up? I mean, outside of the leadership standpoint, okay? And I know you brought that up. From a statistical standpoint, and again, we've talked about this a lot. Yes, South Carolina has brought in players for the transfer portal, but at the same time, too, based on where things are right now with this wide receiver room, he is the most productive wide receiver returning from a year ago. Now, that doesn't include tight ends. Joshua Simon had more receptions last year, more yards. But when you look at it, Luke Dodie had 13 catches last year. Nicholas Harbor is your second most productive wide receiver. If you want to, argue yardage, all right, you can put Harbor in front of Dodie. But when I'm saying productive, I'm talking about receptions, 13, 12. I mean, it's the same. Harbor had much more receiving yards, 195 compared to Dodie's 123. Both players had one touchdown reception each. So I bring those things up simply to say, Burley, is that based on and the reason you mentioned the DeCarrion Joyner comparison, and I again, I'm not saying that in a negative connotation. What the way I look at that is what we saw with USC from the running back position last year. From the running back position, they trusted DK from the jump. They trusted him more than bringing in a guy from the Division II ranks, Mario Anderson, and it took Mario some time. That's why, to me, based on what we saw last year and based on the other things too, that Dodie can help out a young quarterback. He can be his eyes out there. I think when you look at those two things and you look at the reality of it, which is you look at the rest of the room based on, again, the production from being at USC. Heading into week 1, I think the writing's on the wall. Unless guys just absolutely ball out, the guys, some of the other wide receivers in that room, I think that's what we'll see. And I hope Dodie goes off. I hope he has an incredible season. Because regardless of who those 6 guys are in that room, you need some competition. You need guys producing, right? You need guys to be able to create separation, guys that are catching the football consistently. Because the reality is you don't have Xavier Luedecke in that room. And while many of us, and I'm sure 99% of us that are either watching this show or between Joe and I, 99% of us could not have predicted what we would have saw from Xavier Luedecke last year. And I get the coaching staffs, the player, oh yeah, we were expecting that. BS. Just go look at the stats the previous years. And the reality is this too. No one expected Juice Wells to get hurt. Juice Wells doesn't get hurt. We don't see the same production from Xavier. Xavier probably would have had a hell of a year, but the things that he did last year, what he essentially did was make up for the fact that you lost Juice Wells. So I bring that up because Xavier will get hell of a football player. He's not on this team anymore. Juice Wells, your most productive wide receiver from 2 years ago, he's not on this team anymore. You go back even further. I think it was maybe Beamer's first year here. The things that we saw from Josh Vann. So who's that guy that's going to step up in this room? Because the guys that have been the most productive wide receiver, it's been a different guy each year. Who is that guy going to be this year? Because they need it. Because we can sit here and say, you know what? Lenora Sellers is the next greatest thing. Man, start the hype for Lenora Sellers. That's great. Phenomenal. Great running back room. Awesome. Competition in that offensive line room is going to make guys better. Great. But if guys cannot create separation at at wide receiver, I don't care who the hell's playing quarterback for you. Because at some point, you can only scramble so much. You're going to have to be able to make plays with your arm. And if guys are not getting the job done, that's why I think it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out in that wide receiver room. Want to hit a couple ads, and then I also want to touch base about this Tennessee situation. But, Joe, tax season right around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Taxiety is that uncertain feeling you get right before doing your taxes, but you don't have to go through alone. The tax team at Liberty Tax in Irmo, Lexington, and Columbia will walk you through the process, clear up any confusion, and guarantee you'll get the biggest possible refund or your money back. It's tax time. If you're in a hurry for your refund, call on the tax team at Liberty Tax. They're fast, accurate, and guaranteed. On the other hand, if you think you might be owing Uncle Sam, talk to the Liberty Tax team to make sure you're not paying more than you should owe. They'll find every possible deduction for you. Locally owned and operated, staffed by tax professionals from your neighborhood. Open 9 to 9 on weekdays and 9 to 5 on Saturdays with multiple service options. Start through the Liberty Tax mobile app or through the desktop portal. Make an appointment or just walk in. Give a call to upload your tax documents. And when you come in, your return will be ready to review and sign. Give them a call on your screen right now. And for those listening, 803-462-5576. Once again, on your screen right now. And for those listening, 803-462-5576 for all of your tax needs this tax season. Mike.
And today's show is also brought to you by our good friend Clint Hammond of the Movement Mortgage. You see his sponsorship above our heads every show, as well as every GC Live show. If you're going through the process of looking for a home, trying to find the lowest rate on the market, do exactly what our very own Wes Mitchell did, as well as former Gamecock quarterback and captain Perry Orth. What he did as well, he gave Clint a call, and they were able to make that process much easier for both of those guys. 803-771-6933 is that number. All right, let's talk about the Tennessee situation, because the thing about the Tennessee situation, which is interesting, right now, and if you're living under a rock, you don't know what I'm talking about. Story today, a report from Sports Illustrated, SI's Pat 40. Tennessee under NCAA investigation for multiple major NIL value violations across several sports. And I'm reading the story on 3. Our colleague Nick Kosko wrote this story. You can head on over to On 3. Check this story out. But here's what's interesting. Here's what's interesting. And Nick writes this. Just last summer, Tennessee was penalized for more than 200 rule infractions in the football program. Now, there's reportedly more to come. According to 40 details right now, not too many, but the penalties could be severe since this isn't the school's first rodeo. Now, going back to last year, if you recall some of the things that happened to Tennessee, they were hit with a penalty of having to pay, I believe it was like $8 million, something to the effect of that. What it sounds like now, though, when you look at the fact that, again, and Pat 40, one of the best in the business when it comes to covering stories like this, when Pat's coming out saying stuff like that, he's not just saying that out of thin air. You know, he's very locked in to what's going on. I don't want to make assumptions as to what this could be. But 40 also went on to write, quote, many believed that signaled the end of the NCAA doing out of postseason bans, talking about last year with Tennessee's penalty, which had been considered the harshest penalties at the NCAA's disposal. But could that change in this instance? And what could be a blatant repeat violator case at the NCAA's message to the rest of the league, basically saying, hey, you want to do this stuff? All right, we'll hit you with whatever the case may be. Last year, like I said, over 200 infractions. They were issued a fine of $8 million, according to the report. Also had a long list of recruiting restrictions and vacated 11 victories from the 2019 and 2020 seasons after the violations of the Jeremy Pruitt era. I don't want to go too crazy here, Joe, as far as to say, all right, they should be banned for a bowl, this should be happening, blah, blah, blah. But let's just put it for what's, if indeed these violations are as severe as the reports are indicating, how do you send a message to a school that has violated similar rules? Again, do you hit them with the bowl ban? What do you do? Because I feel like depending on what could happen, and again, I don't want to get too crazy here. But I agree hypothetically with you. Here, if you get hit with a bowl ban for, say, 2 years, okay, there's a difference with getting hit with a bowl ban for 1 year. When you get hit with the bowl ban now for at least 2 years, and again, that's not to say that will happen to Tennessee, but I'm just talking about the impact now. And this is the stuff that I'm talking about, how it can impact not just South Carolina, but college football as a whole. And I say South Carolina because you got to be paying attention to stuff like this. Players can leave at any given time now, right? I mean, there were situations in the past where players, they go to a school, and unfortunately, no wrongdoing of their own for some of these guys, and their team was hit with a bowl ban for, X amount of years, and they couldn't. But now you can just get up and leave. You can get up and leave. So if you're hit with a bowl ban for 2 years, some players might say, you know what, screw this. I'm out. So I'm interested to see, obviously, what the infractions are. I'm interested to see what the punishment is. And take Tennessee's name out of the equation. I know there's a lot of people here that don't like Tennessee because they're Gamecock fans. I get that. But just look at it as Team X. Team X. A repeat offender. A repeat offender in this new era that we're talking about with NIL. You have to send a message. You have to send a message.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, like there's a lot we can break down with this Tennessee thing. I'm going to start, I guess, with the importance of it, that it was so recent, right? It involved the number one ranked quarterback recruit, Nico. I can't say his last name. I'm sorry. But it involved Nico, right? And it's a big deal, and it involved NIL as well. So you have to punish a repeat offender. In Tennessee, you have to do something in terms of.
And you're making, and I just want to make sure that we're clear.
No, and
you're making the assumption though that it could be connected. We don't know that for a fact, but just to make sure that we're clear, just in case anyone's missed any of the story.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things when you do have a quarterback that highly rated, you wonder if there's anything that's connected. But continue, Joe, just to clarify that for anyone that may have hopped on late.
Mike's looking out for me, making sure I don't say anything that I don't merge into any muddy waters. But so like in the committee of investigation, I believe, quote, it was just, or they had said, I can't find the quote in the article. I was just looking at it, but it was a lot of violations, over 200 violations. They haven't seen anything like it before. So, since they are repeat offenders, you do have to. Okay, so wait, I was going to say too, like whatever the NCAA makes a decision with this is going to set the precedent for what you do,
correct?
What they do for here on out, right? Because
correct.
Teams are like, if they're light with it, teams are just going to start doing this routinely, right? Oh, 1 year postseason ban, and we got, this quarterback that wasn't even ready to play. It was a garbage season anyways. Golly gee darn it, we're ready to compete, for the title in the playoff in 2 years. Shoot,
so,
like it's going to establish how hard the NCAA is going to come down on these NIL violations, right? Oh, these violations that are now, I guess, public or easier to see, I guess, with NIL and how transparent it is. However, the NCAA, and especially against a brand like Tennessee too, like one of the bigger brands in college football and the SEC, all of that, how harsh will they be against one of their bigger brands? One of the NCAA criticisms has been, they're not as harsh on the bigger brands, the more money-making brands. So we'll see, Mike. There's a lot here. There's a lot of stuff that they did wrong, and that qualifies.
Message. Like you said, it's the message. It's the message you send.
At the end of the day, it's the message.
Travis, you've hit on it. Big Red, you've talked about it. It's the fact of you have a repeat offender, and these violations have occurred within 5 years. Again, I don't want to get too crazy and start throwing all these hypotheticals. I will have a time and place to do that once the infractions are announced. But again, if you're just joining us, Pat Forty of Sports Illustrated reporting today that Tennessee is under investigation for multiple major NIL violations. And I keep saying valuations. I'm so used to saying NIL valuation from On 3. Major NIL violations across several sports. So not just football. How does this impact basketball? How does this impact even baseball? Tennessee's got a pretty decent baseball program, right? So I bring these things up because this is going to be something to pay attention to, not just from a football standpoint. Having said that, and God loves comics, I do want to hit on one thing I did say because I get what you're trying to say. Says, actually, now players care so less about bowl games that they leave undefeated teams before the bowl starts. That said, I love Tennessee getting dinged. Tennessee, and I know, look, going through the SEC is going to be, to me, maybe even more difficult to win the actual conference title than it will be to win the national championship. I know that sounds crazy maybe, but for SEC people, you know what I'm trying to say. Having said that, with the quarterback that Tennessee just brought in, there's people that feel like Tennessee, and I'm not saying I'm in that boat, but there's a belief from some that Tennessee could make a run. And not just winning the conference title, but making it to the college football playoff. Having said that, obviously the circumstances were much different, and you're obviously talking about the Florida State situation last year. That was much different because at that point, Florida State wasn't playing in the college football playoff. Yes, they won undefeated. Yes, they won the ACC title, but they weren't playing in the college football playoff. That's not to say, because I think you'd be naive to believe that we won't get to a point where players make it to the college football playoff, especially in this era, this new era that's about to begin this upcoming season in 2024 with the expansion to 12 teams for the playoff, that you'd be naive to believe, okay, playoff, yeah, if they make it, they're all going to play. No, I don't think that's the case. However, if you're a team and you're a player on a team that feels like they could compete for a national title and they make it to the college football playoff, all that kind of stuff, I think that can change things. If you find out, man, we're going to be hit with a bowl ban, shoot, what's the point, So I think it's not to be the old guy yelling at a cloud here, but because it's obviously multiple reasons why things are changing. But I also feel like we're seeing a shift in mindsets for a lot of these players now. And I don't want to group in everyone, but we're seeing a portion of players now where it's like, okay, what's the end result? What am I chasing? Obviously the majority of them want to go play in the NFL. I get that. But from a team standpoint, what's the point of playing at this school if we can't compete for a national championship? I'll just go do it elsewhere. I'm one of the better players. I'm going to enter the portal. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I feel like we could see. But again, one thing at a time. We'll see what happens next to Tennessee. If you missed any of our program, head on over to the Gamecock Central YouTube page where you can watch this show in its entirety, or if you're a podcast listener, head on over to the Gamecock Central Podcast Network where you can listen to not just this show, but every GC Live show, plus any other shows that are uploaded to the podcast network from Gamecock Central. That includes the GC Takeover Hour, as well as the Garnet Trust Hours, which appear on 107.5 The Game. He's Intern Joe. I'm Mike Yuva. Appreciate everyone that tuned in today. Tune in on Thursday. We have a special guest for you guys. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. And we'll talk some more Gamecock football with you on Thursday. Enjoy the game tonight. It's Gamecock men's basketball. Speaking about the Vols, they're trying to go to Rocky Top and upset the Vols so they can try to get back into the AP Top 25 for the first time in over 363 weeks. Yeah, 2017 I'm talking about. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday and enjoy the rest of your week.